we could bring a coalition together much easier in finding out how to cut spending by looking at overseas spending. Because nobody wants to cut a program at home, and there's a lot of special interests involved. But I think that we should be able to come together, conservatives and liberals and independents, and say, you know, we're in this together. We've spent too much money. Printing money won't work. Borrowing money isn't going to last. And the programs aren't working, so we have to do something. So if we agree that we have to cut, I think the easiest place to cut is overseas. This is why I propose, you know, this year, we should cut $1 trillion. Overseas, and that's a big hump, $500 billion, but I don't think we get our money's worth for money spent overseas. I just don't think there's that much benefit to us. I separate two things, military money and defense money. Everybody who thinks you spend more on DOD defense money and weapons, that we have more defense. No, we have more military, more weapons, but we don't have more defense. So there's a big difference. You can cut military spending without cutting defense. I think we can have a stronger defense. Matter of fact, I think it would be much better if we worried more about our own borders than the borders over between Afghanistan and Pakistan. What can we do about those borders? We can't solve those problems. So I would like to redirect the funding back here at home to take care of our people. But there would have to be some spending cut at home. There's a lot of programs that have been started over the years that technically were not constitutional, but I don't believe that's where we're supposed to cut. We've made too many promises. We've asked people to pay into certain funds, and they're supposed to be taken care of. So to start on Social Security and health care for the elderly or health care for the indigent children, that is not the place to start to balance the budget. Matter of fact, what we should try to do is cut some of these other programs in order to tide people over until we come up with a better program than assuming that the government can always take care of us. So cutting overseas spending should be one of the easiest things that we can do. But the other thing, we'd have to cut some things at home with the protection of certain programs. There's some, in my proposal, there's some protection for health care benefits and also some educational benefit. But it's really a shifting here and a shifting of attitude and recognizing that we have to cut back. So I have 5 departments that I would cut and get rid of. I would go back to 2006 budgeting, which is not, the government wasn't extremely small at that time. A lot of us thought it was way too big in 2006, but it would save a lot of money just going back to that baseline. And you can cut $1 trillion in 3 years, the budget would be balanced. But it would send a strong signal that we're getting our house in order and our finances in order. We've already had one downgrade of our credit rating, and another one is on its way. And if we pursue and are determined that we're going to use dollars forever to bail out Europe, and our banks are intertwined with all the European banks. The banks in Europe bought all the debt from, or not all, but a lot of the debt they hold is Greek debt and Spanish debt and Italian debt. It really probably is either worthless or 50 cents on the dollar. But who's going to suffer if we don't bail them out? The banks are going to suffer. But if they bought that debt, they're the ones who are supposed to suffer. You're not supposed to have to bail them out. That would be a way to get back, but signal could be sent that our finances would be handled differently. But I think we need to send a very strong signal to the world that our foreign policy is changing. I've had a very modest suggestion that I have made that we ought to talk to countries before we bomb them, just communicate with them. And that might be, a radical idea, but the reason I have this idea is because I lived through the Cold War in the military. I was in the military during the 60s. 62, I was drafted during the Cuban crisis. That was resolved rather quickly, but then I was in later on for a total of 5 years. But during the Cuban crisis, I can recall the tenseness, and it didn't last real long. But Kennedy had the good sense at least to call up Khrushchev before we had a nuclear war. And lo and behold, Khrushchev reasoned with the president, and he said, we put weapons on your border, you have weapons on our border. And Kennedy said, oh, well, that's the case. I guess we'll take some weapons out of Turkey, you take them out of Cuba, and they had an agreement, and it happened, it was resolved. what's wrong with talking to people even when they're pretty different than us, and they don't, they have a whole different economy and a political system, but at least it was in the mutual interest of both countries to at least talk to each other. Today, if I suggest that we talk to our potential enemies, that they think this is heresy. But, you know, we have 12,000 diplomats in our services, in our government. I'm suggesting that we make them work a little bit. Why don't we practice a little bit of diplomacy? Talk about foreign policy and stopping the wars and bringing the troops home and taking care of our own business, saying, oh, you're an isolationist. You don't want to deal with the world. But the truth is I'm not an isolationist. I don't want to intervene in the internal affairs of other nations. But that's just, you know, a wise choice. I would like to trade and travel and deal with other countries. Matter of fact, the more we do, the founder said, the more you trade and talk to people, the less likely you are to fight with them. And this is true. Once we started talking with China, even though they turned out to be our banker, which was sort of an unusual consequence, but you know, we started talking to them and trading with them, and now we're not shooting and killing each other as we were when I was in high school.